Malevolent Shrine. Malevolent Shrine is Sukuna's domain expansion, also known as the King of Curses, and it is one of the most purely destructive domains in all of Jujutsu Kaisen. When activated, instead of creating a closed space separated from reality, Sukuna manifests the image of a distorted Buddhist shrine directly within the real world. The four entrances of the shrine are transformed into enormous mouths with human-like teeth and tongues, creating a sensation that is both malevolent and ritualistic, like a holy site dedicated solely to slaughter. The sure-hit mechanism of Malevolent Shrine operates through two core slashing techniques, dismantle and cleave. Dismantle is used to slice apart inanimate objects, while cleave targets entities with cursed energy and automatically adjusts its cutting power based on the target's durability, ensuring a lethal strike. Within its effective range, thousands of slashes rain down every second, relentlessly tearing everything apart, until the domain is deactivated or Sukuna can no longer sustain it. Once inside this death zone, the concept of defense or evasion almost ceases to exist. The most godlike aspect of Malevolent Shrine lies in its open barrier. By deliberately not closing the barrier and leaving an escape route, Sukuna forms a binding vow in exchange for an enormous attack radius of nearly 200 meters. His curse technique does not enclose space, but is instead applied directly onto reality itself, turning the entire area into an altar of destruction. During the Shibuya incident, this power was fully displayed when Sukuna erased multiple city blocks in an instant, crushing everything and everyone into fine dust. In his battle with Gojo, Malevolent Shrine further demonstrated a terrifying level of flexibility. Sukuna was able to alter the domain's conditions in real time, shrinking its range to increase firepower while also exploiting the open barrier to attack the barrier of unlimited void directly from the outside, where it was more vulnerable. After previously losing the ability to use a domain, Sukuna regained Malevolent Shrine through consecutive black flashes. By chapter 258, he deployed an incomplete version when facing Itadori, as he could only perform hand signs with one hand. Even so, Sukuna maintained the open barrier did not reduce the range or firepower and continued to apply his curse technique directly onto reality, turning the area into a zone of annihilation. Coffin of the Iron Mountain. Coffin of the Iron Fortress is a domain expansion used by Jogo, one of the four disaster curses affiliated with Kenjaku. When activated, Jogo drags his opponent into a completely enclosed space, where the internal environment recreates the core of an erupting volcano. Cracked rock walls, magma constantly surging from the ground, and temperatures reaching 1,300 degrees Celsius. The overwhelming heat of this domain causes most Jujutsu sorcerers to ignite and die the moment they enter before they can even attempt to resist. This is a fully realized lethal domain, where Jogo's curse technique is directly engraved into the domain's space itself. This means attacks based on magma or extreme heat do not need to travel or approach the target in any conventional sense, but are instead determined to have already hit the moment they are activated. The only way to survive is to nullify this mechanism through special jujutsu measures such as simple domain, or by deploying one's own domain expansion to contest the space. This is precisely why Jogo was defeated when facing Gojo. Although Coffin of the Iron Mountain is extremely refined and can be considered an instant kill against nearly every other character in the series, it is still completely overwhelmed by a more polished domain combined with Limitless. Unlimited Void. Unlimited Void of Satoru Gojo is regarded as the pinnacle of modern jujutsu, a domain expansion that does not kill its opponent through physical force, but destroys them from within the mind itself. When the barrier closes, the target is thrown into a space resembling an infinite universe, where all information, all sensations, and all concepts of the world flood in at the same time. The brain is forced to receive everything, but because there is no endpoint, the process of comprehension never finishes. In other words, once someone is dragged into Unlimited Void, the battle is virtually already over. The greatest drawback of Unlimited Void lies in its indiscriminate area of effect. This domain affects everything that exists within it, including allies, making its use in crowded areas extremely dangerous. However, the Shibuya incident demonstrated Gojo's exceptional level when he shortened the activation time of his domain to just 0.2 seconds. That brief interval was enough to incapacitate high-grade curses, yet did not cause lasting harm to nearby civilians. This was an improvised but extremely refined application, showcasing a level of domain control that almost no one else can achieve. Even Sukuna could not take this power lightly. After less than 10 seconds under the sure hit effect, the brain of the King of Curses was damaged severely enough that he could no longer deploy domain expansion in the later part of the battle. Even so, Unlimited Void is also a domain that is extremely difficult to maintain as a barrier. If the opponent is strong enough to attack directly from the outside, the barrier can completely collapse, as happened during the first domain clash between Gojo and Sukuna. Gojo quickly overcame this weakness by flexibly altering the size of the barrier, expanding its range to envelop Sukuna's domain, and then compressing it to trap the opponent entirely within. Fairly speaking, Gojo truly held the advantage in this domain battle to the point that Sukuna was forced to rely on Mahoraga in order to escape death in that decisive confrontation. Self-Embodiment of Perfection. Self-Embodiment of Perfection is Mahito's domain expansion, and it is also the most complete manifestation of his soul manipulation ability. When the domain is activated, the surrounding space sinks into dense darkness, and the target is enveloped by enormous hands clasped together like a twisted flower. From there, countless other arms interweave and tighten around the prey, creating the sensation that their very soul is being held directly within Mahito's palms. The true lethality of this domain comes from the way it amplifies idol transfiguration. Under normal circumstances, Mahito must make physical contact in order to transfigure an opponent's soul. However, inside Self-Embodiment of Perfection, that condition is completely removed. Simply by being drawn into the domain, your soul immediately falls under absolute control, allowing Mahito to transfigure it instantly with almost no movement at all. For most Jujutsu sorcerers, this is a checkmate situation, where death is decided the moment the domain closes. However, this domain also contains an extremely dangerous exception for Mahito himself, Yuji Itadori. Because Self-Embodiment of Perfection automatically connects the souls of everyone inside, Mahito attempting to affect Yuji effectively means inadvertently touching Sukuna's soul. The retaliation from the King of Curses is immediate and brutal, powerful enough to destroy the entire domain in an instant. This is the double-edged sword Mahito faces when confronting a vessel of a higher-tier entity. Mahito's most terrifying evolution appeared during the Shibuya incident, when he learned to deploy his domain in just 0.2 seconds, taking direct inspiration from Gojo. This extremely short interval allowed Mahito to activate idol transfiguration over a wide area, while closing the domain before Sukuna could react. As a result, Mahito was able to deal effective damage to his targets without triggering Sukuna's direct intervention. Horizon of the Captivating Skandha. Horizon of the Captivating Skandha is Dagon's domain expansion. When activated through hand signs or the curse seal engraved on his abdomen, Dagon pulls his targets into a space resembling a peaceful tropical beach, with palm forests stretching across one side and an endless ocean on the other. However, this beauty is only a facade, as the entire domain is in fact a deadly prison where escape is nearly impossible. The sure hit mechanism of this domain turns the ocean into an infinite factory that produces predators. The sea-based Shikigami created by Dagon are not launched or summoned in a conventional manner. Instead, they materialize almost instantaneously at the point of attack, appearing in a state where they are already biting directly into the target. Because the attack does not travel through space, any attempt to evade based on speed or reflexes is almost meaningless. From the victim's perspective, these beasts simply appear and tear their body apart in the same instant. Dagon also demonstrates tactical thinking through his ability to allocate firepower, such as directing 70% of the swarm toward a particularly dangerous enemy while assigning the remaining 30% to other targets. This domain once easily overwhelmed veteran Jujutsu sorcerers like Nanami and Maki until Megumi deployed his own domain to nullify the sure hit effect and create a decisive opening. That opening is what allowed Toji Fushiguro to enter the domain. With the sure hit advantage gone, Dagon was quickly crushed under an overwhelming assault, and Horizon of the Captivating Skandha collapsed along with him. Chimera Shadow Garden. Chimera Shadow Garden is Megumi Fushiguro's domain expansion, and its most distinctive feature is that it is still an incomplete domain. Megumi is unable to create a fully closed barrier to completely separate the space, so instead of constructing an independent world, he is forced to flood an existing physical area, such as an arena or an enclosed room with dense, liquid-like shadows. The ground turns into a pitch-black abyss, and anyone standing inside must reinforce their legs with cursed energy or they will be dragged down endlessly. Within this sea of shadows, buoyancy, resistance, and even oxygen virtually do not exist. Megumi can summon multiple Shikigami at once, create duplicates, and hide himself within the shadows to launch attacks from blind spots the opponent cannot anticipate. This operating method is what allowed Megumi to use Chimera Shadow Garden to contest Dagon's domain, nullifying the opponent's sure hit effect and creating a crucial opening for Nanami, Maki, and Toji to charge in. Later during the culling game, Megumi even forcibly closed his domain by turning a gymnasium into a temporary barrier, trapping Registar inside. Although it remains incomplete and cannot incorporate a guaranteed hit, Chimera Shadow Garden still amplifies the full potential of the 10 Shadows technique far beyond its normal limits. However, this lack of completion also also comes with a physical weakness. Megumi's shadows can store and restrain objects, but he must still bear the full real-world weight of whatever is swallowed. Reggie exploited this by dropping massive heavy objects such as vehicles into the domain, forcing Megumi to endure pressure measured in tons. Through this, it becomes clear that Chimera Shadow Garden is not a domain that overwhelms through sheer power, but rather a technique that demands creativity and high adaptability, where tactical thinking can surpass raw strength. Graveyard Domain. Graveyard is the unofficial name of the domain expansion used by the smallpox deity, a special grade curse whose abilities are tied to disease and death. When the domain is activated, the entire space is transformed into a dark graveyard deep within a forest, where everything operates according to a rigid process of death, resembling the infection cycle of a lethal disease, rather than a conventional attack. The sure hit mechanism of Graveyard proceeds through 3 fixed stages. First, the target is immediately sealed inside a coffin. Next, the coffin is dragged underground and crushed by a massive gravestone that falls straight down from above, burying the victim beneath the earth. After that, a 3-second countdown begins. If the target cannot escape before the time runs out, they will be infected with smallpox and die on the spot. More dangerously, this process can repeat automatically, continuously capturing and executing the victim until they are completely defeated. Despite its extreme lethality, Graveyard has a clear weakness. It functions like a pre-programmed machine, with almost no capacity for tactical adaptation. During the confrontation with Mei, this weakness was fully exploited. She deliberately allowed the domain to focus its sure hit mechanism on her younger brother as bait, while she herself searched for a way to approach and directly attack the curse. At the same time, Ui used Simple Domain to disrupt the guaranteed hit effect, creating an opening for Mei to finish off the smallpox deity. Deadly Sentencing. Deadly Sentencing is Hiromi Higuruma's domain expansion, and it completely overturns the very concept of combat in Jujutsu Kaisen. This is a non-lethal rule-based domain in which physical violence is absolutely forbidden. When the domain is deployed, the battlefield instantly transforms into a closed courtroom. The user assumes the role of the prosecutor, the target becomes the defendant, and every verdict is decided by a shikigami known as judgment. The moment the domain takes shape, judgment presents a charge based on the defendant's true record. The crucial point is that judgment knows the entire truth, but does not fully share that information with Higuruma. At this stage, the battle is no longer about strikes or techniques, but about logic and argumentation. The defendant is given only a single chance to respond with 3 clear options: remain silent, confess, or deny the accusation. After the defendant's defense, the prosecution is also granted only one opportunity to rebut using evidence that judgment provides in the form of a sealed envelope. Once both sides have completed their arguments, judgment delivers a valid verdict according to the law of the domain. If the defendant is found not guilty, the domain immediately dissolves with no consequences. However, if the verdict is guilty, the domain also dissolves, and the punishment is applied instantly in the real world. The most common punishment is confiscation, which strips the opponent of their curse technique or core combat ability, leaving them almost completely unable to fight back. However, the most terrifying punishment is death penalty. When judgment pronounces a death sentence, Higuruma is granted the executioner's sword, a blade capable of killing anyone with a single touch, regardless of defense or strength. Deadly Sentencing once demonstrated its terrifying weight in major confrontations, especially when aimed at Sukuna. However, it was precisely at that moment that this domain also revealed its key weakness. When applying confiscation, judgment removed a cursed tool instead of the innate technique, inadvertently allowing Sukuna to escape a near-certain death. This shows that despite being extremely dangerous on a conceptual level, Deadly Sentencing is still bound by rigid rules that the user cannot fully control. Authentic Mutual Love. Authentic Mutual Love is Yuta Okotsu's domain expansion and also the most complete answer to the limitations of copy. When the domain is opened, the surrounding space transforms into a massive wasteland, covered in shattered, cross-shaped structures and countless katana densely embedded throughout the ground. Yuta's domain operates on 2 clearly defined layers. The first is a guaranteed hit effect bound directly to the barrier. Yuta selects one curse technique that he has previously copied and engraves it into the barrier, turning that technique into a sure hit attack. As a result, the specific effect of the domain is not fixed, but instead changes depending on Yuta's choice at the moment of activation. The second layer is an infinite katana arsenal. Each sword embedded within the domain contains a random cursed technique that Yuta has copied before. Only Yuta can activate them, yet even he does not know which technique a sword contains until he draws it. Each katana can be used only once before disappearing, while the total number of swords is unlimited. This randomness becomes the greatest strength of Authentic Mutual Love. Opponents cannot predict which technique Yuta will use next, forcing their defenses into a constant state of overload. In the decisive battle with Sukuna, Yuta engraved Angel's curse technique into the barrier to create a guaranteed hit, forcing Sukuna to continuously maintain hollow wicker basket in order to nullify the domain. During this time, Yuta took advantage of his vast collection of curse techniques through the katana arsenal to apply relentless pressure, combining physical combat with unpredictable attacks. Although the domain was ultimately shattered by a successful world-cutting/authentic mutual love, proved why Yuta is regarded as one of the most dangerous jujutsu sorcerers of the new generation. Time Cell Moon Palace. Time Cell Moon Palace is Naoya Zenin's domain expansion, and it is also the most brutal, evolved form of projection sorcery. When the domain is opened, the surrounding space sinks into an empty darkness, leaving only a central stage. Upon it lies a path of flesh extending behind Naoya, ending in a gigantic eye that serves as the anchor point of the entire domain. The sure hit mechanism of Time Cell Moon Palace does not come from direct attacks, but from injecting film strips into the target's neck. From that moment on, anyone inside the domain is forcibly bound to the 24 frames per second rule of projection sorcery. Every movement must be broken down and executed in precise rhythm. Any deviation immediately triggers punishment. The most terrifying aspect of this domain is how it amplifies projection sorcery down to the cellular level. On the surface, it appears as if no attack has occurred, but within the target's body, it is being shredded piece by piece. However, Time Cell Moon Palace ultimately failed against Maki. Due to her heavenly restriction, which leaves her completely without cursed energy, the domain's barrier could not recognize Maki as a living being and instead treated her as an inanimate object. As a result, she was not bound by the 24 frames per second rule and was able to move freely within Naoya's space. Exploiting this fatal blind spot, Maki approached from behind and finished Naoya. Idle Death Gamble. Idle Death Gamble is Kinji Hikari's domain expansion, and if Higuruma represents absolute law, then Hikari is the embodiment of probability and luck. This domain is constructed like a massive pachinko machine with a single objective hitting the jackpot. It is a non-lethal domain where the sure hit effect does not deal damage, but instead forces the entire set of rules directly into the opponent's brain. Because of this non-hostile condition, Hikari's domain activation speed is absurdly fast, allowing it to be deployed in under 2 seconds. When Idle Death Gamble is opened, the battlefield transforms into a game stage. Hikari and his opponent are drawn into a gamble where they must fight while simultaneously waiting for 3 matching symbols to line up. The base probability of hitting a jackpot is only 1 in 239, but Hikari does not simply leave everything to chance. He constantly manipulates the flow of the game through special visual effects and scripted scenarios to push the odds of a jackpot even higher. The opponent is forced to choose between defeating Hikari before the round ends or surviving long enough to see whether fortune will favor him. The true nightmare begins the moment a jackpot is hit. At that instant, the theme song plays for exactly 4 minutes and 11 seconds. During this period, Hikari gains infinite cursed energy along with automatic reverse curse technique, allowing his body to regenerate continuously without any need for conscious control or thought. In this state, Hikari is nearly immortal and can charge straight into battle without concern for lethal damage. When the music ends, the domain resets, and Hikari can immediately reopen Idle Death Gamble with a full energy gauge ready for another round. In theory, if luck continues to smile upon him, Hikari can chain multiple jackpots in succession, creating an almost endless loop of gambling and near immortality, enough to wear down any opponent over time. Through his battles with Charles Bernard and especially Hajime Kashimo, Hikari proved that Idle Death Gamble is no longer a mere game of chance, but a domain driven by combat experience and sheer fighting spirit. Womb Profusion. Womb Profusion is Kenjaku's domain expansion, and it is also one of the most difficult domains to deal with in Jujutsu Kaisen. When activated, the domain manifests as a massive pillar formed from countless distorted faces and overlapping spiritual bodies, giving the impression of a convergence of crushed souls. Anyone who enters its effective range is struck by an explosive, sure-hit attack, even though the force does not manifest as a visible physical blow. Similar to Malevolent Shrine, Womb Profusion is an open barrier domain. Kenjaku does not construct a closed barrier, but instead applies his curse technique directly onto the surrounding reality. Because there is no external barrier layer, this domain is almost immune to conventional methods of barrier destruction, making it extremely difficult to dismantle. The technique engraved into Womb Profusion is Anti-Gravity System, an ability Kenjaku once acquired and then reversed to generate an overwhelming, crushing gravitational force. The sure hit effect places an invisible pressure upon the target, powerful enough to pin the body to the ground and crush bones and internal organs as if bearing an unbearable massive weight. This property played a decisive role in the confrontation with Yuki Tsukumo and Tenjin. Yuki's hesitation in deploying her domain created an opening for Kenjaku to activate Womb Profusion first, allowing him to dominate through the advantage of an open barrier. Tenjin also struggled to dismantle the domain, as there was no clear barrier to identify and destroy. In a short span of time, the sure hit effect of womb profusion inflicted severe injuries on Yuki, stripping away and neutralizing nearly all of her ability to fight back. Threefold Affliction. Threefold Affliction is Yorozu's domain expansion, an ancient sorcerer, and the ultimate manifestation of the brutal efficiency of construction. When the domain is opened, the surrounding space becomes almost empty, leaving only massive organic structures floating in the void, resembling detached insect-like brains and nervous systems, creating a sensation that is both unnatural and suffocating. The core of Threefold Affliction lies in True Sphere, the most perfect object Yorozu can create. This sphere possesses absolute geometry, generating infinite pressure at any point of contact. It materializes directly on the opponent and erases everything it touches from existence. In theory, this is an attack that is nearly impossible to defend against and almost a guaranteed instant kill. However, even a mechanism that seems absolute has its limits when facing Sukuna. In the decisive battle, Yorozu opened Threefold Affliction to ensure her attack would hit, but that moment of hesitation created a fatal opening. Sukuna immediately summoned Mahoraga, exploiting its adaptive ability to nullify the logic of infinite pressure. The true sphere was destroyed, and shortly afterward, Yorozu was defeated, leading to the collapse of the domain. Yuji Itadori's domain expansion. Yuji's domain expansion is a domain completely unlike any that has appeared before. When it is deployed, the space takes the form of an old train station filled with a sense of nostalgia, recreating the city where Yuji spent his simple childhood. This abnormality is also reflected in the appearances of the two figures inside the domain. Yuji appears as he was before being possessed by Sukuna, while Sukuna takes on Yuji's form. This symbolic reversal reflects the parasitic relationship and conflict between the two souls that have been bound together since the very beginning. As a result, this domain is not merely a place of combat, but a space where two identities are forced to confront each other at the deepest level. Through his long time as Sukuna's vessel, Yuji came to understand the structure and boundaries between souls. The domain's sure hit does not target the physical body, but instead uses dismantle with extreme precision to sever the bond between Sukuna and Megumi, forcing the King of Curses to release the fingers and abandon the host. If Malevolent Shrine represents absolute destruction, then Yuji's domain is its complete opposite. He does not seek to eliminate Sukuna through raw power, but instead uses his domain to separate and save another, while forcing the King of Curses to face the ordinary memories that he has always looked down upon. This stands as the clearest proof of the growth in both power and ideals of Yuji Itadori. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos.